Hey Kyle, nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kyle Bellinger from Osito Coffee. You guys supply us with our awesome coffee from Burundi through Long Miles. And really happy to have you here to chat with us about coffee and your story and importing and exporting because you guys do it all. Yeah, can you just take us through sort of a brief background and how you got into coffee and how it's how it's progressing for you guys over there at Osito.
Yeah, sure. My story in coffee goes back, I guess, over 10 years. I started as a barista in Rockland County, New York. I got into it because I saw my friends pouring some fancy latte art at the cafe. So I was like, oh man, I really want to do that. But I got a job there. I started doing that, getting into cafe culture, but really it was the coffee itself that made it interesting. And so I ended up leaving that job for a cafe here in Connecticut, Neat Coffee, which ultimately I became a partner at many years later. I learned how to roast coffee, and that was kind of my real formal education in specialty coffee. From there, as you know, I kind of I skipped a few steps and ended up buying a coffee farm in Colombia with my partner, who is Jose Javier Lozada. I met him on my first trip in Colombia, and I liked him. The farm wasn't the most impressive farm on paper, but I knew that he was the guy that I wanted to work with. I ended up buying all the coffee that he had available at that moment, and everything went great. Coffee landed; it was tasting really great. I ended up going back to visit him about 6 months later, and he explained to me that his brother was his partner in the farm, but his brother didn't want to do it anymore. He wanted to be bought out. Jose couldn't afford to do that, so he asked me if I would be interested in becoming his partner. And I, of course, said, no, I can't do that. I don't speak Spanish. This is my second time in Colombia. There's no way that I am going to pay many, many thousands of dollars for a piece of this farm. But inevitably, a few months later, we were sitting at a lawyer's office in Bogota, and we were signing papers on, on a farm together. Um, I really did. I really was focused on the novelty of owning a coffee farm. I thought that would be cool. And it is cool, don't get me wrong, it is very cool. But the reality of what I was doing set in that lawyer's office, where I, wired this person that I couldn't actually communicate with because he doesn't speak any English. Even to this day, doesn't speak any English. I, at the time, didn't speak any Spanish. And here I am wiring him a whole bunch of money. And I was like, wow, I don't know what I'm doing. This is crazy. But here we are several years removed from that, and Jose has been the absolute best partner that I could ever imagine. Awesome. He has been just an absolute rock. He's not exactly your average farmer. Our farm size is much bigger than the average farm. He had a full-time job for many, many years working at the second largest cooperative in Huila, and most recently as their head of quality control. So he would cup something like 800 containers of coffee a year, which is like an unbelievable amount of coffee. Furthermore, he did a lot of interfacing with foreign clients. And while he didn't have any sort of formal exporting experience, he was kind of well positioned to make a move from that job. And so if you fast forward to mid 2017, we had an opportunity to start an exporting company together. I had gotten more interested in kind of the beginning of the supply chain rather than the end of the supply chain. Obviously, that's why one buys a coffee farm. But together, he and I had an opportunity to start this exporting company. Simultaneously, I started an importing company here in the U.S. And the idea was just to create a really, really short supply chain between farmers in Colombia and roasters here in the U.S. to work very closely with the farmers, to work very closely with the roasters, keep everything in house, really short, transparent supply chain, and make it really straightforward for a lot of people, especially small roasters who aren't necessarily the most savvy at buying coffee directly. Um, the thing is with direct trade, as much as that term doesn't really mean anything, um, you really do need an exporter and an importer to help with logistics. And I figure if we do it all under one roof, then it makes it easier for even a tiny little roaster who's buying 5 bags at a time to buy coffee directly from a farmer. And with the internet and everything, it makes the world so much smaller. So even like meaningful relationships can be established based on small purchases.
Yeah.
And the fact is, the average farm size in Colombia is less than 2 hectares, and so the production from that farm size isn't all that big, and so even a small roaster may have a meaningful impact on a farmer's life by buying just a few bags.
Yeah. It's really
So
hard
that was the idea, day one. But of course, as an importing entity, we have the opportunity to work in other countries as well. And at the time when we started, my focus was Colombia, but after a few months of business, it was like, oh, well, I think we could tackle other countries. So it started with Ethiopia, naturally, the queen of all origins. And we got connected with some people there that do really, really great work and have helped us find some amazing coffees. And we're just building similar supply chains in Ethiopia, even though we're not an exporter there. We do have people on the ground that help us with a lot of things, but we're not actually exporting coffee. From there, I think Burundi was third. With Burundi, it's a little bit different. We work, as you know, with the Long Miles Coffee Project. So with them, we're not sourcing coffee. They do all the sourcing. I mean, they do all the sourcing. They do the processing. They do the milling. They do the export. They do just about everything. And they say, "Hey, Kyle, this is what's coming," and it's not so much me, at a cupping table, plowing through hundreds of samples, picking what I want. It's just whatever they have, we'll take. And to be clear, they also participate in a lot of the sales effort as well.
How did you guys get connected, actually? How did you and Long Miles come together?
So David Stallings, who is their roaster relations person and QC person and, all around multi-tool for Long Miles, he and I have been good friends for a very long time. And given that they're, a relatively small operation with very, very specific and detailed needs, it didn't really make sense for them to work with one of the larger trading houses. It made a lot more sense to work with a smaller company that can provide a little bit more custom service for them. And so it just kind of worked out really, really well. And their model, is very similar. As similar as Burundi and Colombia can be. Is very similar to how we operate in Colombia, with a focus on long-term relationship, with a focus on working in the best interest of farmers. And so that's how that started. And, we love working with them. David, I consider a very good friend, and getting to know Ben, who obviously is one of the founders, along with his wife, Christy. It's been a really, really good match. And we're really grateful to work with them.
Yeah, we were really super excited to be able to get some of that coffee past crop. Past crop, not past crop coffee.
Right.
And so we're looking forward to continuing that relationship and having Burundi on our menu as new crops come around, because we went through it really fast. It was really it really worked out for us. People really, really enjoyed it, and I know the quality has always been really high coming out of Long Miles. So super excited about growing and building that relationship, which is always really nice. And you talked about direct trade, and I think there's a lot of guys out there or gals who are saying, oh, we have direct trade relationships, we have this and that, and we go down to these farms, and that's all good and well. Don't want to take anything away from those people. Certainly there are big companies out there that have people in all countries or are sending out buyers, but at the end of the day, for guys like us here at Path, we want to still have access to amazing coffee, but we don't have the resources to go out to all these farms all over in Ethiopia and Burundi and Central and South America. And so we rely on people like you and other importers that we work with to find those unique and distinct coffees.
Yeah.
And kind of then we have actually the best of everything because we get to choose from a lot of options as opposed to if I were to go down to Colombia, how many farms could I really visit in a week and really make
Yeah.
meaningful relationships, and how many cups of coffee or how many coffees could I really cup through? At the end of the day, it would be so limiting, and I would probably feel bad. I'd probably taken this person's time. I'd want to buy something just to buy something, and
Yeah.
that's not kind of how I want to run my business. I want to have options and know that those options are really good options. You know,
Yeah.
so again, the direct trade. I think it's important, but I also think that there's others sort of direct trade, like me working with you guys. I feel like that's still a direct trade. It's not. We're not talking about buying commodity coffee on the sea market here. We actually know where the coffee's coming from, and
Yeah.
yeah, I recently did an article on our website about like what is specialty coffee, and I think so many people think that specialty coffee is just about the coffee,
Yeah.
and it's also about the relationships and
Yeah.
the sourcing and the roast profiling and the customer service that we offer and the customer service that you guys offer to us, and that all kind of comes together into what is specialty coffee.
Yeah. I mean, I think with specialty, all the details have to matter.
Yeah.
With commodity coffee, it is a commoditized product. One 320 bag lot from Brazil is the same as the next, or same from Colombia or wherever. Like it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of plug and play. And
Mm-hmm.
but with the specialty throughout the whole chain, it's just different, and you have to impart different value at each link in the chain.
Yeah, and it all has to line up to get this amazing cup of coffee.
Exactly, it does. And like you said, it is not just about the coffee. It is about service. It is about relationship, and it is about these other things that are somewhat intangible, but create value along the whole way.
Sure.
And thus, I think helps a roaster like you and cafes that you sell to be able to sell a $3 cup of coffee and say, we really feel good about it, about everything that went into this.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Can you talk a bit about like the quality control measures that you guys go through? I know specifically in Colombia because you guys are really entrenched in Colombia.
Yeah.
Can you kind of go through that process a little bit?
Yeah. 1 second. So, um, you know, obviously Colombia is where we do the majority of these types of analyses, but I would say the same holds true in just about every single country that we work in terms of the quality that we're looking for. I would say a big thing that it always goes back to is moisture content and water activity.
Are
The
you guys
idea
doing water
there is that
activity?
we're looking for,
Do you guys have a water activity meter?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we use what's called a psychrometer
Okay.
from a company called Xtech. We have one in Colombia, we have one here in the U.S., and we use it to measure all the samples that come in. And the idea is that what we're looking for is stability. Knowing that if we're sourcing an 84-point coffee or an 83-point coffee or a 90-point coffee, that 3 months later, 6 months later, hopefully even 9 months later, that it's going to be the same. It's not going to dip in quality. And so we think that by measuring these things, along with UV analysis, that we're going to be selecting some of the most stable coffees that we can find. Obviously, after that, there is a focus on cup score, but we have a wide range of needs because we have clients who have a wide range of needs. We need some 83-point coffees. We need some 87-point coffees. So we have a home for a lot of different things. It's just a matter of like, okay, so what is this really? Is this an 84-point blender kind of coffee, or is this an 87-point microbot? And so we go through all the protocol, moisture, water activity, cupping, but we also we're measuring yield factor. In Colombia, what that looks like is it's based on the number of kilos of parchment that it takes to create a 70-kilo bag of coffee. So right now the average in Colombia is 92.8. So meaning 92.8 kilos of parchment to make a 70-kilo bag of screen 15 coffee.
Okay.
So basically the idea there is that the higher that number is, if it's a yield factor of 93 or a 95, that's the more defects there are in the coffee, the more waste coffee essentially.
Okay.
And so we're looking for cleaner coffee. And so the coffee that we buy in Colombia has a max yield factor of 90.
Okay.
And the prices that we pay are based on a yield factor of 88. Meaning if a grower delivers 89 or 90, the price comes down a little bit. But if they deliver 87, 86, which is basically perfect, they get more. Mm-hmm. And so that's one quality control thing that we do. You know, that is a little bit different than a place like Mexico, where, you know, we're dealing with even smaller farm sizes, extreme altitudes based on the latitude. So, you know, 2,000 meters in Mexico is not the same thing as 2,000 meters in Colombia. And so a lot of those growers are dealing with frost damage. And therefore the yields tend to be much, much lower, specifically from places like the Sierra Mazateca, which are really high altitude, really remote. Infrastructure is poor. The coffees, when milled correctly, are fantastic. I mean, they're ridiculously good. But we know what we're getting into because the yields are going to be a little bit different than they are in Colombia. Okay. I mean, not a little bit different, a lot different.
A lot different.
And so it's not, you know, a one-to-one comparison, Colombia, Ethiopia, Mexico, Burundi. But, you know, we are paying attention to what yields are and what we're, you know, what kind of defects we're dealing with on a regular basis. You know, apart from that, I mentioned UV analysis. This is probably the newest QC step that we deal with. It's still a little bit ill-defined in the industry. But we're using it more and more effectively just to, you know, going back to stability, you know, we're using it to judge, you know, how long these coffees are going to hold up.
Does the UV light also show you like what is a potential Quaker after roasting and things like that? Or is this, it's all green, I assume you're doing this on green?
Yeah, so it's mostly used for seeing if there are any defects as a result of the wet processing. Basically, when cherries are depulped,
okay.
For wash coffees,
sure.
knowing if there are any broken beans and any sort of like, you know, bacteria that may have infiltrated the bean as a result of that processing. And obviously, you know, the more instances there are, the worse that coffee is. But when you shine it when you have it under a black light, you know, we see a lot more clearly. We're also looking for general glow, which would kind of indicate problems with drying. You know, we generally look for lower temperature, slower drying. With growers in Colombia who are trying to, you know, when they're selling to average buyers, a cooperative or whatever, they're trying to dry coffee as quickly as possible, deliver it, and get their cash. What we try to do is have them slow down a little bit because we believe that slower drying times, even though you have to wait another week, 2 weeks to get paid, we believe that the coffee will hold up longer. And ultimately, there's a higher likelihood that the clients who buy those coffees are going to come back next year because they were so good. And so that's been a really difficult thing to communicate with growers. Like, you know, they're proud that they dry coffee in 7 days, and I'm like, but can you do 20? And it's like, yeah, that's a really tough shift in mentality.
Do farmers in Colombia typically do their own like processing, or are they moving their parchment to another dry mill? Are they doing their wet milling on site? How are they, like with your farm? Are you guys what processes are you guys doing there?
Yeah, so I mean, our farm, like most farms in Colombia, the wet milling is done on the farm.
Okay.
Most growers are processing their own cherry and drying parchment.
Okay.
I mean, there's certainly a sect of growers who are selling wet parchment. They are just pulping the cherries, finding some buyer who will take wet parchment. And then there is even a smaller sect who are selling cherries to larger processors. Um, but I would say the norm, at least in the specialty industry, is to process your own cherry and dry it down to at least 12% moisture content.
And are they usually using patios, or do any of them do beds?
The norm in Colombia is parabolic dryers. So these are wooden beds with mesh stretched over them and plastic over the top. Like it's an enclosed structure that gets really, really hot under the sun. Um, and it's not terrible if it's ventilated correctly. Um, like I said, more often than not, these are closed structures. And so even if you just open up the sides, it helps a little more airflow. It's still pretty warm in there,
Yeah.
but it does slow down the drying by a couple days,
Okay.
Which, for someone trying to produce commercial coffee, that's a bad thing. But for someone trying to produce specialty, it's a necessity.
Yeah. And have you guys tested? Have you taken the same coffee and done it, let's say, in 7 days, and the same coffee and done it in 20 days, and has the cup changed? The cup score
Yeah,
changed?
pretty meaningfully. A big thing is that when coffee is dried too quickly, when it's exposed to extreme heat, basically, parchment cracks, and that's not a good thing for quality.
Okay. What happens? Like bacteria gets in, or mold, or
Yeah,
fungus?
basically.
It just doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
Because that parchment is a protective layer outside the two seeds of the cherry, right? And so after it's gotten down to that 12% moisture, you don't necessarily dry mill it right away. You wait until it's ready to kind of go somewhere, correct? Or do they mill it right away and throw it into Grain Pro bags and then just put it up on a shelf? Or do you have to be like, okay, we're 10 days out from leaving, mill the coffee and get it in and go?
Yeah, so ideal is that after coffee is dried for our needs, we ask that coffee be dried to 10 to 10.8% moisture content,
Okay.
and between 0.48 and 0.58 water activity.
Okay.
Because ultimately, you can dry coffee in 5 days down to 10%,
Sure.
or you can dry it in 30 days down to 10%. And the water activity is really what helps us gauge how quickly and ultimately how stable the coffee will be, with lower water activity indicating, generally speaking, that coffee was dried a little bit slower.
Can you explain to the viewers what water activity is and how it just like what it does?
Yeah, so moisture content is the amount of water in the coffee. So when I say 10% moisture, meaning it's 10% water in that bean. Water activity is not the content of the water, but the behavior of that water, the volatility of that water. And so higher water activity means it is more volatile, lower meaning it is, more stable. And so generally speaking, above 0.6, we consider coffee to be rather unstable. And down closer to 0.5 is where we would say it is rather stable. And so I would say, generally speaking, the coffees that we're buying in Colombia are between 0.48 and 0.53, which is a pretty tight window. And it is really because we encourage growers to dry for at least 15 days.
And that's affected
like
by
I
the
said,
drying?
you can dry coffee down to 10% in 3 days, but you're probably going to have water activity that's well above 0.6, which is not a good thing.
And so the water activity is affected by the drying time?
Yeah, generally speaking.
Okay.
It's not one-to-one comparison everywhere. Every farm is a little bit different. But yeah, when we measure water activity, we are trying to judge that this coffee was dried slow enough so that parchment was not at risk, and that this coffee will ultimately be shelf stable for a very long time.
Okay, interesting. So can you also talk to me a little bit about, Osito and what you guys are doing right now. Obviously, with COVID, there's a lot of changes. People have adjusted their businesses to, survive, for lack of a better word. And so, can you kind of just go through a little bit about what you guys are seeing in the industry right now, and maybe with some of the things that you're doing to maybe future-proof your business from hopefully nothing like this happens again, but you never know.
Yeah, God forbid. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we have seen a massive shift in how coffee moves from the farm to the middlemen like us, to roasters, to cafes, to consumers. A shift, obviously, more towards e-commerce, to grocery business. So I know, the roasters who I interact with, who are in the best position, some of which are even reporting better numbers than last year, all have robust e-commerce businesses, or good grocery business. Obviously, the roasters who are entirely dependent on wholesale to cafes, they're the ones that are hurting right now.
Yeah.
So I think at least for a little while, we're going to see that trend stick. I think it's changing a little bit. I'm talking to roasters even this week who are saying a lot of their wholesale is coming back online, which is great. I'm happy for them that some of these cafes are opening up again. I think anyone who has restaurant business, it'll still be a while before that comes back. I have one big client who so much of his business is just to restaurant accounts. And even if restaurants open up, coffee is not a priority.
Nobody's taking out coffee from a restaurant.
Yeah. So it's going to be a while before that comes back, I think.
Has that customer been able to pivot a little bit, at least?
A little bit. They were kind of poised to kind of launch a more robust e-commerce business, and so it kind of worked out where they were able to capture a good amount early on.
E-commerce is tough. Coffee is a saturated market. There's a lot of people selling coffee online. And
Yep.
Trying to connect with your customers,
Yep.
Is not easy for sure.
Yeah, definitely. As far as what we're doing, it's a moving target. It's really, it's on one side trying to honor the relationships that we have with growers, not wanting to say to farmers, hey, we can't buy your coffee this year. Yeah. But also trying to meet the actual needs of a lot of the roaster clients that we have. And, as an exporter, a lot of the importer clients that we have elsewhere outside the US. And so it's very, very tricky. Because right now in Colombia, the harvest is in full swing. And to date, we haven't told any growers, hey, we're not really going to work with you this year. Actually, that's not true. That's not true. There have been a couple of farmers here and there that we've decided not to work with, simply because, maybe one or two people that we work with that are out in the middle of nowhere near other relationships that we have. It doesn't really make sense for us to work with them in a robust way unless we have a real demand for their coffee. Mm-hmm. And kind of doubling down on some of the core relationships that we have, a lot of the associations that we work with. So for us, that means working primarily in Suaza, Huila, with a group called Divino Niño, kind of the farmers in and around that area. A group called Martir in La Plata, Huila, and some growers in some of the surrounding municipalities in Nataga, and even across the border in Cauca, where there's some farmers who are connected to that group in La Plata.
What's your farm
and
called?
Then finally,
What's your farm called?
My farm is called El Mirador. It's also in Suaza, actually. Well, take that back. We have 3 farms now.
Oh, wow.
So El Mirador is the original, and then we have 2 more farms in Garzón, Huila.
And how much coffee are you guys producing each season, each harvest?
Between our 3 farms, we produce probably close to a container of coffee.
Okay.
Yep.
How's the harvest going, by the way?
It's going. It was a little dicey right at the beginning because Colombia had pretty strict quarantine measures. And so for anything larger than the average farm where farmers have to hire pickers, it was very difficult for pickers to move from farm to farm.
Okay.
For the average size farm, 2-3 hectares, that's mostly managed by family anyways. And so that was relatively easy. At this stage, now here on September 10th, quarantine measures, especially in Huila, in southern Tolima, they've become a lot more lax, and so it's easier for farmers now. Colombia has shifted towards a more focused approach to quarantine. So Bogota is still like really on lockdown. They've only resumed domestic flights on September 1st. International flights have not resumed yet. Borders are still closed.
Oh, wow.
So Bogota is still tough to get in and out of, but down in Huila, where there have been very few cases even to date, it's just a lot easier to get around.
Okay. But in terms of the quality of the weather is okay, and the cherries look good, and everything else like that.
Yeah, everything looks great. I'm cupping through many samples every week, and coffees are as good as ever.
And when do they start to land here in the States?
In a normal year, we would have had coffee landing in early August. We decided, as a protective measure, to open up our purchasing point a little bit later than normal. We had planned to open mid-May. We closed it down beginning of March, which is normal. Like that's just when the harvest kind of wraps up. It just happened to coincide with when pandemic struck. And normally we'd reopen sometime in May. We decided to push it till August 1st. And then realized, things are kind of getting a little bit better. And so we ended up opening up June 15th. And so we're actually milling our first coffees right now. Hope to have our first box on the water to the U.S. By last week of September. So hopefully landing here by second week of October.
Okay, nice. And how many coffees are you typically bringing in from different regions? Like Burundi, it seems like Long Miles is the only one that you guys bring in right now. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about Ethiopia? Are you working with how many different milling stations, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we work heavily with the Katamaduga Union, who is a union of 30 or 40 cooperatives in the West. We buy from a lot of those cooperatives directly from the union. But we also have some relationships in Guji with a company called Suku Coffee. And so we have multiple suppliers. We also are starting to work with some single farms that are now exporting their own coffee, which is a pretty new thing. It's getting easier for small farms. I say small; these are still probably 20-hectare farms.
Okay.
To be able to export directly. And so in the most recent container that just landed, we imported our first single producer lot from Ethiopia.
How did you connect with that farmer, that producer?
So he is a farmer that has traditionally delivered his coffee to one of the cooperatives that falls under the Katamaduga Union. But he got his own export license. He happened to know. So one of my partners here in the U.S. is actually an Ethiopian American who owns his own exporting company in Ethiopia.
Oh.
He's a very well-connected person. He knows a lot of the farmers, a lot of the associations, a lot of the major players in the Ethiopian coffee industry. And he happened to know a few single producers, and we cut through a whole bunch of single producer lots, and his was one of the best. And so we decided, let's go for it.
This is the first time you're bringing their coffee in?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And when does that arrive?
That's already here.
Oh, that's landed already.
Yeah.
I know you have to run, so I think we're going to leave it at that right now. But I just wanted to thank you so much for coming out and doing this with us today, and hopefully the people who watch this video are going to get a good insight into Osito and what you guys bring to the table. And hopefully they'll reach out if they need to buy coffee, green coffee, not roasted coffee. You can come to us for that.
Yep.
And but you guys are local. You're right here in Stamford, Connecticut, so not too far away. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And hopefully you'll come down and visit us.
Yeah, I hope so. Let's
All
make
right.
it happen.
Cool. Thank you so
Well,
much, Kyle.
no, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to you soon then.
All right. Take care.